The blood on her dress had long since dried to the color of rust, and Penelope Sinclair had stopped counting the days since she buried her parents on the windswept prairie outside Mineral Park, Arizona. It was the spring of 1881, and the 17-year-old girl had learned that grief was a heavy thing, settling into bones like dust into wood grain, permanent and unchanging. She stood now at the edge of town, watching the sun paint the desert mountains in shades of copper and gold, her heart as hollow as the abandoned mine shafts that dotted these hills. Her parents had come west with dreams stitched from gold thread and promises, believing that Arizona territory offered a fresh start after the war had taken everything from them back in Georgia. Her father had been a carpenter, her mother a seamstress, and together they had scraped together enough money to open a small general store in Mineral Park. For 3 years, life had been hard but hopeful. Then the fever came, sweeping through town like a prairie fire, and within 2 weeks both her parents were gone, leaving Penelope alone in a world that cared little for orphaned girls with no money and fewer prospects. The general store had been sold to pay debts she had not even known existed. The small house they rented reverted to the landlord. Everything her parents had built crumbled to dust in her hands, and Penelope found herself with nothing but the dress on her back, a carpet bag containing her mother's Bible and a daguerreotype of her family, and exactly $3.20. Mrs. Henderson, the widow who ran the boarding house, had taken pity on her for a week, but charity had its limits. This morning, she had gently but firmly told Penelope that she needed to find work or move on. The problem was that Mineral Park was a mining town, rough and raw, and respectable work for young women was scarce. The saloons were always hiring, but Penelope had promised her mother on her deathbed that she would never sink to that, no matter how desperate things became. She walked down Main Street as the town began to wake, miners heading to the silver claims that made Mineral Park prosperous, merchants opening their shops, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the hotel restaurant. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She had eaten nothing but a biscuit yesterday, saving her meager coins. The sheriff's office stood at the corner of Main and Cedar, a squat adobe building that looked as worn as everything else in this desert town. A notice board outside displayed wanted posters and public announcements. Penelope stopped, scanning the handwritten notices. Ranch hand needed, must be able to shoe horses. Cook wanted at the Silver Star Hotel. Experience required. Seamstress position, the Murphy household. Her heart lifted at the last one. Her mother had taught her to sew, and she was good with a needle. The Murphy household was one of the wealthiest in town, the owner of the largest silver mine in the area. She carefully memorized the address and smoothed down her dress, trying to make herself presentable despite the journey dust and wear. The Murphy house sat on a hill overlooking the town, a 2-story structure that seemed almost palatial compared to the rough cabins and adobe homes below. Penelope climbed the wooden steps to the porch, her hands trembling slightly as she knocked. A stern-faced housekeeper answered, looking Penelope up and down with obvious disapproval. "Yes, I am here about the seamstress position," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The position has been filled." The door began to close. "Please," Penelope said, the word escaping before she could stop it. "I am very skilled. My mother taught me. I can do any kind of sewing, mending, alterations. I need the work." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I am sorry, girl. Mrs. Murphy hired her cousin from Prescott yesterday. There is nothing here for you." The door closed with a definitive click, and Penelope stood on the porch fighting back tears. She would not cry. Tears solved nothing. Her mother had taught her that too. She spent the rest of the morning going door to door, asking at every business, every household that might need help. By noon, her feet ached, her mouth was dry, and she had been turned away from every place she tried. Mineral Park had no use for another young woman with no experience and no connections. As she walked back toward the boarding house, wondering if Mrs. Henderson might allow her one more night if she gave up her last $3, she heard raised voices coming from the livery stable. A man's voice, deep and steady, cut through the afternoon heat. "I paid you for 4 horses, sound and healthy. That roan has a cracked hoof and you know it. You calling me a cheat?" Another voice, higher and defensive. Penelope slowed, not wanting to walk into the middle of a confrontation, but curious despite herself. Through the open stable doors, she could see 2 men facing each other. The stable owner, a squat man with a perpetual scowl named Briggs, and a tall cowboy she did not recognize. The cowboy stood with easy confidence, his hat tipped back to reveal dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore practical clothes, dusty from travel, and his hand rested casually near his hip, though not threateningly. "I am saying that roan is not fit for the trail and I want a replacement or my money back." "The deal is done," Briggs said. "You bought the horses, they are yours now." The cowboy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. I will remember that you are a man who sells lame horses to strangers. I expect everyone in town will find it interesting to hear about." Briggs's face reddened. "You threatening me?" "Just stating facts." The cowboy turned and began leading 4 horses out of the stable, including the limping roan. As he passed Penelope, his eyes met hers briefly, a startling clear gray in his tanned face. He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." Then he was past her, leading the horses down the street. Penelope watched him go, wondering who he was and where he was headed. There was something solid about him, dependable like a tree that could weather any storm. "What are you staring at?" Briggs had appeared in the stable doorway, still glowering. Penelope quickly looked away and hurried down the street. The last thing she needed was to make an enemy of anyone in this town. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson met her at the door with sympathetic eyes. "Any luck, dear?" "No, madam." The older woman sighed. "I am sorry, Penelope." "I truly am, but I cannot keep giving you a room for free. I have bills to pay myself." "I understand." Penelope pressed her last $3 into Mrs. Henderson's hand. "For your kindness, I will find somewhere else to stay tonight." "Child, you keep that money. You will need it more than I do." But Penelope closed her fingers around the coins and stepped back. "My mother always said to pay your debts. Thank you for your generosity, Mrs. Henderson." She left before the widow could argue further, her carpetbag heavy in her hand. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains, and the spring evening would be cold once darkness fell. Penelope walked to the edge of town, past the last of the houses, to where the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. There was an old abandoned homestead about a mile out, a place she had explored once with her father. The cabin was half collapsed, but part of the roof remained. It would provide some shelter from the wind at least. The walk took longer than she remembered, and by the time she reached the homestead, her legs were shaking with exhaustion and hunger. The cabin looked even worse than in her memory, but beggars could not be choosers. She pushed open the sagging door and stepped inside. The interior was dim and musty, filled with the debris of whoever had lived here before. But one corner looked relatively intact, and Penelope cleared away the worst of the dirt and debris. She laid out her shawl on the floor, used her carpetbag as a pillow, and curled up in a ball, trying to conserve warmth. Sleep came in fitful waves, broken by the sounds of the desert night and the gnawing ache in her stomach. She dreamed of her mother's cooking, of warm kitchens and safe homes, and woke to find tears on her cheeks and the first light of dawn creeping through the holes in the roof. She had no plan, no prospects, no hope. But she got up anyway, smoothed down her dress, and prepared to walk back to town. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps today someone would give her a chance. The sound of horses stopped her before she left the cabin. Penelope froze, her heart suddenly pounding. Travelers were common on the roads around Mineral Park, but this was not a main road. This was an abandoned homestead in the middle of nowhere. Through the broken window, she saw 4 horses, and leading them was the cowboy from yesterday. He had stopped about 50 yards from the cabin and was examining the roan's hoof, his back to her. Penelope watched silently, not wanting to reveal her presence. The cowboy worked with efficient competence, cleaning the hoof, examining the crack. Then he straightened, shaking his head, and looked directly at the cabin. "I know someone is in there," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I am not here to cause trouble, just passing through." Penelope hesitated, then stepped out of the cabin. Better to face whatever came head-on than to hide like a frightened rabbit. The cowboy studied her for a moment, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You are the girl from town, outside the stable." "Yes, sir." He looked past her to the ruined cabin, then back to her face. His expression remained neutral, but she thought she saw concern flicker in those gray eyes. "This is a hard place to spend the night." "It was available," Penelope said, lifting her chin. She would not be pitied. The cowboy nodded slowly. "I am Daniel Harper. I am on my way to the Triple H Ranch, about 10 miles northwest of here. I am the new foreman there." "Congratulations," Penelope said, not sure what else to say. Daniel continued to study her, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw far too much. The hunger, the desperation, the bone-deep weariness. "The Triple H is owned by Henry Harding. He is looking for a housekeeper. His last one retired and moved back east to live with her daughter." Hope flared in Penelope's chest, bright and painful. "A housekeeper? You would live on the ranch. Room and board plus wages. Mr. Harding is a fair man, a bit gruff but decent. He has been managing on his own for 2 months now, and the place is a disaster." Daniel paused. "If you are interested, you could ride out there with me. I can introduce you." Penelope stared at him, trying to process this sudden turn of fortune. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "True enough," Daniel said. "But I know what it looks like when someone is at the end of their rope. I have been there myself. Besides, I am not doing this out of pure charity. Mr. Harding has been complaining about needing a housekeeper since I agreed to take the job. If I show up with a solution, it makes my life easier." It made a certain practical sense, and Penelope appreciated that he did not dress it up with false sentiment. "I have some experience keeping house. I helped my mother before she passed. That is more than enough. Mr. Harding is not looking for perfection, just someone reliable who can cook a decent meal and keep the place from falling down around his ears." Daniel gestured to the horses. "The roan cannot carry much weight with that hoof, but you are not very big. She should manage if we take it slow." Penelope realized she was still clutching her carpetbag. She looked at the ruined cabin, at the desert stretching endlessly around them, at this stranger offering her a lifeline. Every instinct her parents had taught her said to be cautious with strangers, especially men. But what choice did she have? Stay here and starve? Walk back to Mineral Park and hope for a miracle? "All right," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Harper." "Daniel is fine," he said, moving to help her onto the roan. His hands were gentle but impersonal as he steadied her, making sure she was secure before handing up her carpetbag. "And you are Penelope Sinclair. Well, Miss Sinclair, let us get you to the Triple H." They rode northwest, following a trail that wound through the desert hills. Daniel kept the pace slow for the sake of the injured horse, and Penelope was grateful. She was not an experienced rider, and the roan's rolling gait was difficult enough without speed added to the mix. As they rode, Daniel talked in an easy, undemanding way that required little response from her. He told her about the Triple H, how it had been established 15 years ago by Henry Harding, a former cavalry officer who had fallen in love with this harsh landscape. The ranch raised cattle and horses, supplying both to the army forts and mining towns throughout the territory. Mr. Harding's wife passed away 5 years ago, Daniel said. Since then, he has been alone except for the ranch hands. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was with him for years, but her daughter back in San Francisco needed help with her own children, so she left a couple months back. He has been trying to manage on his own and doing a terrible job of it. How did you come to work for him? Penelope asked, curious despite herself. I worked on a ranch in Texas for several years. The owner died and his son decided to sell off everything and move to Chicago. I heard Mr. Harding was looking for a foreman and I needed work. Simple as that. There was more to the story, Penelope sensed, but she did not press. Everyone had their own sorrows and secrets. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace, and Penelope's throat grew dry. Daniel must have noticed because he stopped and handed her a canteen. Drink, he said simply. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing Penelope had experienced in days. She forced herself to drink slowly, not wanting to appear too desperate. When did you last eat? Daniel asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Yesterday morning, Penelope admitted. Without a word, Daniel reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside were biscuits and jerky. Here. I cannot take your food, Penelope protested, even as her stomach cramped with longing. I have plenty. Mr. Harding will feed us both when we arrive. No sense in you suffering until then. He pressed the bundle into her hands. Eat, Miss Sinclair. This time Penelope did not argue. She ate slowly, savoring every bite while Daniel pretended to focus on checking the horses. His kindness made her throat tight with emotion she could not afford to show. Crying would solve nothing. They rode on, and gradually the landscape began to change. The barren desert gave way to areas with more vegetation, scrub brush and scattered mesquite trees. In the distance, mountains rose purple and hazy against the blue sky. The ranch uses the runoff from those mountains, Daniel explained. There is a creek that runs through the property, gives the cattle water, makes this land valuable out here. By midday, they crested a rise and Penelope saw the Triple H spread out below them. The main house was a long, low adobe structure with a covered porch running along the front. Nearby stood a large barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pasture islands, and she could see several men working near the corrals. That is home, Daniel said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. As they rode down toward the ranch, Penelope felt her nervousness returning. What if Mr. Harding did not want to hire her? What if Daniel had misunderstood? She smoothed her dress again, acutely aware of how shabby she must look. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall and broad-shouldered with silver hair and a weathered face. He wore dusty work clothes and walked with the slight stiffness of old injuries. His eyes, bright blue and sharp, swept over Daniel and then Penelope. "Harper," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "You are back." "Yes, sir. The horses are bought, though the stable owner in Mineral Park tried to cheat me with a lame one." Daniel dismounted in an easy motion and helped Penelope down. "Mr. Harding, this is Miss Penelope Sinclair. I met her in town, and I understand you are looking for a housekeeper. Miss Sinclair has experience and needs work." Henry Harding looked Penelope up and down with the same sharp assessment he probably used on horses and cattle. She forced herself to meet his gaze steadily despite her pounding heart. "You know how to cook?" he asked bluntly. "Yes, sir. My mother taught me. I can make bread, stews, roasts, pies. I can clean and do laundry and mending. How old are you?" 17, sir. Family in Mineral Park. "No, sir. My parents passed away 2 months ago from fever. I have no one." Something flickered in Harding's eyes, perhaps memory or sympathy. "That is a hard thing. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, sir." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded decisively. "All right. The pay is $20 a month plus room and board. You will have a room off the kitchen. I expect 3 meals a day for myself and the hands, laundry once a week, general cleaning and upkeep. I will not tolerate laziness or disrespect, but I am fair. You work hard, you will be treated well." Agreed. $20 a month. It was more money than Penelope had dared hope for. "Yes, sir. Agreed." "Good. Harper, show her to her room and then get those horses settled. Miss Sinclair, once you are situated, I would appreciate some coffee and whatever you can put together for lunch. The kitchen is a mess, fair warning." "I will manage, sir," Penelope said. Harding gave a brief nod and strode back toward the barn, already shouting orders to one of the hands. Daniel caught Penelope's eye and smiled slightly. "Welcome to the Triple H." The room he showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chest for her belongings. A small window overlooked the side yard. After the abandoned cabin, it looked like a palace. "The kitchen is through here," Daniel said, leading her through a doorway into a large room dominated by a cast iron stove, a long work table, and shelves lined with supplies. Dirty dishes were piled everywhere, and the floor needed sweeping, but the basics were all there. "Mr. Harding was not exaggerating about the mess," Penelope said. "He has been eating in town or living on jerky and beans. You will have your work cut out for you." Daniel paused at the door. "If you need anything, the bunkhouse is that building near the barn. Someone is usually around." "Thank you," Penelope said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "For everything. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what I would have done." Daniel looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Like I said, I have been where you are. We all need help sometimes." He touched his hat brim. "See you at lunch, Miss Sinclair." After he left, Penelope stood in the middle of the chaotic kitchen and felt tears prick her eyes again. But this time, they were not tears of despair. For the first time since her parents died, she had a roof over her head, the promise of regular meals and work that she could do. It was not much, but it was infinitely more than she'd had yesterday. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time the sun began to set, Penelope had made significant progress. The dishes were washed and put away, the floor swept and scrubbed, the work table cleared and cleaned. She had found salt pork, beans, onions, and flour, and managed to put together a hearty stew and a pan of cornbread. Coffee was brewing on the stove, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. When the men came in for supper, stomping dust from their boots and washing up at the pump outside, Penelope had the table set and the food ready. There were 5 hands besides Daniel and Mr. Harding, all of them looking surprised and pleased to see real food on the table. "Miss Sinclair, this is a sight for sore eyes," Harding said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Men, this is our new housekeeper. You will treat her with respect or answer to me. Clear?" There was a chorus of "Yes, sir," and respectful nods in her direction. Penelope served the food, grateful that her hands did not shake despite her nervousness. The men ate with the single-minded focus of those who did hard physical labor all day, and the compliments were sincere if simple. "This is real good, miss." Best meal I have had in weeks. You make this cornbread. It is perfect." Daniel caught her eye from across the table and gave her a small smile of approval. Penelope felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. That night, lying in her narrow bed with a full stomach and a locked door between her and the world, Penelope allowed herself to cry. But these were different tears, a release of tension and fear that she had been holding for too long. She cried for her parents, for the life she had lost, for the girl she had been who would never exist again. But she also felt something else, fragile and tentative: hope. The days fell into a rhythm. Penelope rose before dawn to start the stove and prepare breakfast. After the men ate and headed out to their work, she cleaned the kitchen, did laundry, scrubbed floors, mended clothes. She prepared lunch and dinner, learning the preferences and appetites of the men who worked the Triple H. She baked bread twice a week, made pies when there were supplies, kept the house clean and orderly. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done before, but Penelope found satisfaction in it. There was something deeply reassuring about the routine, the tangible results of her labor. A clean floor, a good meal, mended shirts hanging on the line. These were things she could control when so much of life felt chaotic and uncertain. Mr. Harding proved to be exactly as Daniel had described: gruff but fair, demanding but not cruel. He rarely gave compliments, but he noticed when things were done well and made sure Penelope knew it through small gestures. An extra slab of bacon for supplies when he went to town. A new set of kitchen knives to replace the dull ones. A quiet thank you when she brought him coffee while he worked on the ranch accounts. The other hands were respectful and kept their distance, understanding the unspoken rules. All except Daniel. Daniel was different. He helped carry water for laundry without being asked. He fixed the door on her room when it started to stick. He brought in wood for the stove each evening, stacking it neatly by the hearth. And he talked to her, not with the awkward courtesy the other men showed, but with genuine interest. He asked about her life before Mineral Park, and Penelope found herself telling him about Georgia, about the war's aftermath, about her parents' dreams of a better life out west. In turn, Daniel shared his own story. He had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 6 children. His father had been a rancher who lost everything to drought and debt. Daniel had been working cattle since he was 12, learning the hard lessons of survival in an unforgiving land. "My oldest brother tried to keep the ranch going," Daniel said one evening as Penelope prepared dinner and he sat at the kitchen table, cleaning tack. "But there was too much debt and not enough rain. We lost it all when I was 16. My brothers scattered, looking for work wherever they could find it. My parents moved to San Antonio to live with my sister. I have been drifting from ranch to ranch ever since." "You ever see your family?" Penelope asked, rolling out dough for biscuits. "Not in 4 years. I send money when I can, but it is hard to get away." There was something wistful in his voice. "I would like to have my own place someday. Nothing big, just enough land to run some cattle, build a decent house, put down roots." "That sounds nice," Penelope said softly. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection. They were both adrift, both searching for something solid to hold onto in this harsh territory. As the weeks passed, Penelope found herself looking forward to those evening conversations more than she wanted to admit. Daniel had a quiet strength about him, a steadiness that made her feel safe. He was 24, only 7 years older than her, but there was a maturity in him born from hardship and responsibility. She noticed other things too. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The competent way he handled horses and cattle. the gentleness in his hands despite the calluses and scars. The way he always made sure she had help with the heavier chores without making her feel incapable. Penelope tried to tell herself it was simple gratitude, that she was confusing appreciation with something deeper. But her heart knew the truth. She was falling in love with Daniel Harper. The realization terrified her. Love was a luxury she could not afford. She had finally found stability, security, a place where she belonged. Romance could jeopardize all of that. Besides, Daniel had never indicated that he saw her as anything more than the housekeeper, someone he had helped in a moment of charity. So Penelope tried to keep her feelings hidden, focusing on her work and maintaining a friendly but professional distance. It was harder than she expected. Spring turned to summer, and the desert heat became oppressive. The men worked shorter hours, rising before dawn and finishing by early afternoon to avoid the worst of the sun. Penelope adjusted her cooking schedule, preparing the large meal at midday and keeping supper light. One afternoon in late June, Mr. Harding announced that he and 3 of the hands would be driving a herd of cattle to Fort Verde, a journey that would take nearly 2 weeks. "Harper, you are in charge while I am gone. Keep things running smooth." "Yes, sir," Daniel said. After Harding and the others departed, an odd quiet settled over the ranch. With only Daniel and 2 young hands remaining, the place felt almost empty. Penelope continued her routines, but she was aware of Daniel's presence in a way she had not been before. Without the buffer of the other men, their interactions felt more intimate, charged with something neither acknowledged. 3 days after Harding left, one of the young hands, a boy named Tommy who was barely 18, came down with a fever. Penelope heard the commotion from the kitchen and found Daniel helping Tommy from the barn to the bunkhouse, the boy's face flushed and his movements uncoordinated. "What happened?" Penelope asked, following them. "Heat sickness," Daniel said grimly. He was working on fixing the fence line in the full sun. Should have known better. They got Tommy into bed, and Penelope immediately went into action, drawing cool water from the well, making him drink slowly, placing damp cloths on his forehead and neck. She had seen heat sickness before, knew how dangerous it could be if not treated quickly. "Keep him cool and hydrated," she instructed. "Do not let him go back to sleep until his fever breaks." For the rest of the day and into the night, Penelope and Daniel took turns sitting with Tommy, making sure he drank water, changing the cool compresses. By midnight, the boy's fever finally broke and he fell into a natural sleep. Penelope sat back in her chair, exhausted, and found Daniel watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You were good with him," Daniel said quietly. "You knew exactly what to do." "My father got heat sickness once when I was 14. My mother showed me how to care for him." Penelope pushed a strand of hair from her face. "I was so scared he would die, but he did not. Not then. He survived 3 more years before the fever took him." Her voice caught, and she looked away, embarrassed by the show of emotion. Daniel stood and crossed to where she sat. He crouched down so they were eye level, his gray eyes serious. "Penelope, I want you to know something. What you have done here, how hard you have worked, how you have made this place feel like a home again, it matters. You matter." The way he said her name, the intensity in his gaze, made Penelope's breath catch. "Daniel, I am not good with words," he interrupted. "Never have been. But I have been wanting to say this for weeks now, and I cannot keep it in any longer. You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. What you have survived, how you have kept going despite everything, it amazes me. And somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as just the housekeeper. I see you, Penelope, all of you, and I am falling in love with you." Penelope stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "You love me." "Yes," simple, direct, honest. "I thought I was imagining things," Penelope whispered. "I thought it was just me, that I was being foolish. It is not just you." Daniel reached up and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers infinitely careful. "If you do not feel the same, tell me now and I will never speak of it again. We will go back to how things were, and I will respect that. But if there is even a chance that you might feel something too, I need to know." Penelope covered his hand with hers, leaning into his touch. "I do feel the same. I have for weeks. I was just too afraid to admit it, even to myself." The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Penelope said, and then she was in his arms, his embrace strong and solid and safe. She buried her face in his shoulder and felt tears come again. But these were tears of joy, of relief, of hope finally realized. They held each other in the quiet bunkhouse while Tommy slept peacefully, and the desert night pressed close around them. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel cupped her face in both hands. "I want to do this right," he said. "Court you properly. Ask Mr. Harding's permission when he gets back. I do not have much to offer yet, but I am saving money. In another year or two, I could buy some land, start building that ranch I told you about. I want you to be part of that dream, Penelope. I want to build a life with you." "Yes," Penelope said simply. "Yes to all of it." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Penelope felt something in her chest unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. This was what healing felt like. This was what hope tasted like. The next 2 weeks passed in a glow of happiness that Penelope had not thought possible. She and Daniel were careful to maintain propriety, especially around the hands, but they stole moments together, talking and planning and dreaming about the future. Daniel told her about the piece of land he had his eye on, about 20 miles northeast of the Triple H, with a creek running through it and good grazing. "It is not much," he said. "Maybe 200 acres, but it is a start. We could run cattle, maybe some horses. Build a house on that rise overlooking the water." Penelope closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. A home of their own, built with their own hands. Children someday, growing up with the freedom and possibility that the West offered. It seemed like an impossible dream, but Daniel made it feel real. When Mr. Harding returned from Fort Verde, Daniel asked to speak with him privately. Penelope waited anxiously in the kitchen, trying to focus on making dinner, but mostly just listening for sounds from Harding's office. Finally, the door opened and Daniel emerged, grinning. He said yes. Penelope nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "He did." He said he wondered when I would get around to asking. "Apparently we have not been as subtle as we thought." Daniel crossed the kitchen and pulled her into a quick embrace. "He also said you are the best housekeeper he has ever had, and if I do anything to make you leave the Triple H before we are married, he will fire me himself." Penelope laughed, giddy with relief and joy. "When?" He suggested next spring. "That will give us time to save more money and make proper arrangements, and it will give me time to start building on that land I want to buy. You are going to buy it. Already put down the deposit before we left for Fort Verde. The owner is willing to hold it for me while I pay it off. By next spring, it will be ours, Penelope, our land, our future." That evening, Mr. Harding raised a glass of whiskey at dinner and made a short, gruff announcement. "Harper has asked for permission to court Miss Sinclair, and I have given my blessing. They plan to marry next spring. Any man who has anything to say about it can take it up with me." There were no objections, only congratulations and genuine happiness from the hands. Tommy, fully recovered from his heat sickness, raised his glass. "To Daniel and Miss Sinclair, may you have many happy years together." "Hear, hear," chorused the others. Penelope felt her face flush with pleasure and embarrassment, But when she looked at Daniel across the table and saw the love shining in his eyes, nothing else mattered. The months that followed were the happiest of Penelope's life. She continued her work at the ranch, but now there was purpose beyond simple survival. She was building towards something, preparing for a future that included love and partnership. Daniel spent every spare moment working on their land. On Sundays, their day off, he would take Penelope out to see the progress. She watched as the foundation of their house took shape, as walls rose slowly but steadily. It was hard work, and Daniel often came back exhausted, but he never complained. "It has to be perfect," he said. "It has to be worthy of you." "It already is," Penelope assured him, "because you are building it for us." They planned every detail together. The house would be small but comfortable, with 2 rooms to start and space to add on as their family grew. There would be a large kitchen because Penelope loved to cook, a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over their land, a barn for the horses and cattle they would raise. As fall arrived and the oppressive heat gave way to cooler temperatures, Penelope began working on her wedding dress. She bought fabric with her saved wages and spent her evenings sewing by lamplight, creating something beautiful from simple materials. The dress was not fancy, but it was made with love, every stitch a prayer for the future. Winter came, mild by Eastern standards but cold enough that the Triple H slowed its operations. Fewer cattle to tend, more time for maintenance and repairs. Daniel worked on the house during every moment of daylight, determined to have it finished before spring. On Christmas, Mr. Harding gave them a surprising gift: 2 heifers and a bull, the start of their own herd. "Every rancher needs a beginning," he said gruffly. "This is yours." Penelope hugged the older man impulsively, and she saw his weathered face soften with pleasure. "Thank you, Mr. Harding, for everything. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. I will never forget that. You earned it, girl, every bit of it." He cleared his throat. "You are like a daughter to me, you know. Never had children of my own, but if I had, I would have wanted them to be like you and Harper. Strong, good, determined." It was the most sentimental speech Penelope had ever heard from him, and it brought tears to her eyes. The new year of 1882 arrived, and with it came the final preparations for the wedding. They set the date for the first Saturday in April, when the desert would be blooming with wildflowers and the weather would be perfect. Penelope sent word to Mineral Park, inviting Mrs. Henderson and the few other people who had shown her kindness. Daniel's family was too far away to make the journey, but he wrote them letters sharing his happiness. As March turned to April and the wedding day approached, Penelope felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her life had changed so dramatically in the past year. She had gone from orphaned and desperate to loved and hopeful. Sometimes it felt like a dream, too good to be real. "It is real," Daniel assured her on the evening before their wedding. They sat on the porch of the main house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Tomorrow you become my wife. We start our life together on our own land. It is all real, Penelope, all ours." "I love you," Penelope said, the words feeling both familiar and new. "I love you too." More than I have words to say. The wedding took place at noon in front of the half-finished house on their land. A circuit preacher who traveled through the territory performed the ceremony. Mr. Harding stood as witness, along with the ranch hands and the few guests from Mineral Park. It was a small gathering, but it was perfect. Penelope wore her handmade dress, her hair braided with wildflowers that Daniel had gathered that morning. Daniel wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving her face. When the preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, their "I do" rang out clear and certain in the desert air. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a smile. Daniel cupped Penelope's face gently and kissed her, and she felt like she was floating. This was real. This was happening. This was her new beginning. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Mr. Harding had brought out tables and chairs, and there was food and music. One of the hands played fiddle, and people danced in the spring sunshine. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the guests began to leave. Mr. Harding shook Daniel's hand firmly. "You take care of her, Harper." "With my life, sir." "And you," Harding said to Penelope, pulling her into an awkward but genuine embrace. "You take care of him right back. Marriage is a partnership, you remember that." "I will, Mr. Harding. Thank you for everything." Finally, they were alone. Daniel took Penelope's hand and led her into their house. It was not completely finished yet. The floors were not varnished, the walls needed paint, but it was structurally sound and furnished with the basics. Their bed, a table and chairs, a stove that Daniel had installed just last week. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harper," Daniel said softly. Penelope looked around at the rough walls, the simple furnishings, the wide windows that let in the desert twilight, and felt her heart swell with happiness. "Home," she repeated. "Yes, this is home." That night, in the house they had built together, on the land they would work together, Daniel and Penelope began their married life. They made love with a combination of tenderness and passion, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of the desert night. "Tell me something," Penelope said drowsily. "When you found me at that abandoned homestead, did you have any idea it would lead to this?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. "Honestly, no, I just saw someone who needed help, but somewhere between Mineral Park and the Triple H something changed. By the time we reached the ranch, I knew you were special, and every day after that I fell a little more in love with you." "I was so scared," Penelope admitted, "so lost. I did not think I would survive, much less find happiness again." "You are one of the strongest people I know," Daniel said. "You would have survived, but I am grateful I got to be part of your story." "You are not just part of my story," Penelope said, tilting her head up to kiss him. "You are my story. You helped me write a better middle when my beginning was so tragic, and now we get to write the ending together." "Not an ending," Daniel corrected gently. "A beginning. This is just the start, Penelope. We have our whole lives ahead of us." The first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Running a ranch, even a small one, was demanding work. Daniel spent long days tending the cattle and horses, repairing fences, digging irrigation ditches from the creek. Penelope managed the house, tended a large garden, preserved food for winter, and helped with the livestock when needed. It was hard work, but they tackled it together. On difficult days when nothing seemed to go right, when the cattle got loose, or a storm damaged their barn or money was tight, they leaned on each other. On good days when they accomplished something significant or simply enjoyed the beauty of their land, they celebrated together. Daniel continued to work as foreman for Mr. Harding, which provided steady income while they built up their own herd. Penelope took on sewing work from people in Mineral Park, adding to their savings. Slowly but surely, they were making their dream a reality. Their first winter as a married couple was cold and occasionally lonely, but they kept each other warm in all the ways that mattered. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, Daniel's deep voice bringing stories to life. They played cards and checkers. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. By the time spring returned, Penelope knew she was pregnant. She told Daniel on a warm evening in March as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "A baby." Daniel's face transformed with wonder and joy. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes." Sometime in early October, I think. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. This is incredible. A child, our child. Are you happy? Penelope asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not even begin to cover it, Daniel said. You have given me everything, Penelope. A home, a future, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Penelope continued her work, though Daniel became increasingly protective, insisting she not do anything too strenuous. She found his concern endearing, even when it became excessive. Mr. Harding was delighted by the news and offered practical help. You will need a midwife when the time comes. Mrs. Thompson in Mineral Park is the best. I will make sure she is available. As autumn arrived and Penelope grew larger, Daniel finished adding a second room to the house, a nursery for their child. He built a cradle from smooth wood, sanding it until there were no rough edges. Penelope sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at the smallness of them. On a cool October evening, Penelope's labor began. Daniel rode to Mineral Park to fetch Mrs. Thompson, and by midnight their son was born. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Daniel held him with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. He is beautiful. He is perfect. What should we name him? Penelope asked, exhausted but happy. What about Samuel? After my grandfather, he was a good man. Samuel Harper, Penelope said, testing the name. I love it. Baby Samuel thrived, growing strong and healthy. The first year of his life was a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Penelope had never known she could feel this way about anyone, this fierce protective devotion. Daniel was a wonderful father, patient and gentle. He would walk the floor with Samuel when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rumbling voice. He built toys and played endlessly, never too tired or too busy for his son. As Samuel grew into a toddler, the Harper Ranch continued to grow as well. Their herd expanded, and they were able to hire a young hand to help with the work. Daniel no longer needed to work for Mr. Harding full-time, though he still helped out occasionally. When Samuel was 2, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1885. They named her Elizabeth, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered.